Hey guys, good evening here. Week 5 of the college football season is here. College fantasy football season is here. Going to try things a little different this week with streaming live on YouTube. Going to have you guys in. Going to run down the agenda of what we're going to cover. And maybe we can go ahead and get some questions answered for you guys. Questions that you may submit here on the show. And questions that you might be submitting over on Twitter. As we do the show, I'll go ahead and set the chats on, and I think we're okay and ready to rock and roll for week 5. So real quick, guys, while we wait for a few folks to get online, let's kind of run through the agenda of what I'm going to do today. You know, usually I try to run through the rankings for you guys, give us some thought processes of what's going on here. I'm going to try to slow that down to a jog this week and try to address more players as we go. As a result, I have shortened and condensed the start bench list this week. I'm going to kind of shave off a little bit of time right there. And I know that there's a game at the top of the hour that many of you guys are interested in, Texas and Iowa State. So think of me as sort of the appetizer before the big game. I don't know if I'll get off on time. I'm not really looking to rush the show this week, guys. More folks are coming on, more guys are coming on in. I'm going to stay here and try to address some questions at the end of the show. Like I said, address some of your mentions over on Twitter. See if I can get some of those start benches. Emails coming in all day yesterday. Today, we put the extended rankings out last night. But like I said, just a jam-packed show today with running through the positional rankings, addressing the start bench. There's one thing I want to mention, and now that a few of you all are on here, is we're going to go ahead and mention two things I want to do. I'm going to mention an offense that I think is on the rise, an offense that I think the stock is going up. So stick around for towards the end of the show. I'm going to mention that, and I want to make sure that you guys get that, and I want to make sure I try to get as many questions addressed as possible. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. We're going to get into the player rankings, and like you guys have joined me before in the past, tight ends, kickers, defense, special teams, I'm really going to shy away right there. A lot of leagues that play college fantasy football incorporate the tight ends at wide receiver. I highly recommend that if you don't do it. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Most leagues, remember guys, this isn't the NFL, it's college fantasy football. It's what, we're different. That's what makes this league so much more fun. It's what separates the college game from the pro game. Talk your commissioners into rolling that wide receiver spot, that tight end spot into wide receiver, and see a lot more points go up on your board. But with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the quarterback rankings. A lot of emails coming in, and as I see these rankings, I'm going to slow down to a jog this week, try to address more players where I've gotten the most emails on the show, emails this week, and kind of bring you through the thought process that we have here with the show with some of these rankings. Now, we're going to go ahead and start at the top, and I'm specifically going to kind of round out the top 10, right? Mason Rudolph, Lamar Jackson, JT Barrett, Nick Shimonek, Zach Abey for Navy. A couple of things I'll mention real quick. Lamar Jackson, always a little scary play when they're playing a team that's not that good, Murray State. I think the one thing that you have to do, and the thing that happened last week, a lot of people had to sweat out points from Lamar Jackson last week because Louisville scored 21 straight points and Lamar Jackson didn't account for any of those 3 touchdowns. And then I think they wound up sweating out and getting another 28, 27, 29-point game from Lamar Jackson, but you probably sweat that one out there in the second half. I think this is going to be an easy road as well. I look for Lamar Jackson to get a lot of points early. And put a lot of points on the board by halftime. I don't expect him to play 4 quarters. If he does, then something's wrong over there. JT Barrett playing at Rutgers this week. I think if there's one thing to pay attention to is that Rutgers defense has been a little underrated this year. So JT Barrett, after his huge performance last week, we didn't just look at it and said, okay, they're playing Rutgers this week. JT Barrett's going to do it again. Little concerned about the 3 ranking, but like I said, when you do these rankings, you have to take confidence into the equation in a little bit. And the Rutgers run defense has been pretty stout. I think Ohio State can do some damage in the air. I look for JT Barrett to have another big week on the road at Rutgers. Nick Shimonek, Mason Rudolph, and that Oklahoma State Texas Tech game should be a lot of points right there. And Zach Abey, right? I mean, the ceiling is super high for Zach Abey, the quarterback of Navy this week, playing on the road at Tulsa. I emailed somebody today, the ceiling for AB is so high, you could be looking at one of those 45, 50-point games from him this week against a Tulsa defense that can't get out of its own way. So, and then let's round out the top 10. Quentin Flowers, Jalen Hurts. I really like him. I know he disappointed a lot of fantasy owners last week, playing Ole Miss this week. I look for Alabama to score a lot more points. I think Jalen Hurts rebounds, has a big week. And Kelly Bryant, Clemson, playing on the road at Virginia Tech. Dangerous game for Clemson, I get that, but usually the bigger the game, the bigger the stars rise, and I do like Kelly Bryant to kind of shoulder the load on offense and lead Clemson to a win over there on the road at Virginia Tech. A lot of emails coming in on the Friday night game, Luke Falk, Sam Darnold matchup. I have a lot of confidence in Falk right now. With college fantasy football, there's a lot to be said about momentum, and right now Luke Falk has a lot of momentum on his side. They're at home. Primetime game Friday night, and I do think USC they've kind of lived a little dangerously lately. Deontay Burnett, Ronald Jones should be a go Friday night. It looks like they're going to be at full force on offense, with the exception of maybe Steven Mitchell. I expect a lot of points to be scored in that game, and I think you're okay leaving Luke Falk in your starting lineup, even against USC. And look, a new name up here at the top of the list, Caleb Evans, UL Monroe quarterback. I know a lot of you wish we would have been on him last week, but I do think you have to consider the competition and what he has shown us up until this point. They get a home game against Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina, okay defense, but I think Caleb Evans' ceiling, especially running the ball, is so high right now. One of those guys has momentum going for him. They don't play a daunting defense. I think you've got to roll with him if you happen to pick him up. And another, one guy I mentioned that's kind of, I think, a rebound week as well, Nick Stevens, quarterback, Colorado State, playing out at Hawaii. When you look at wide receiver Michael Gallup, quarterback Nick Stevens, that offense hasn't done a lot. They did play a road game at Alabama. I think this is a week for the Colorado State offense, in particular the passing game, to start clicking. I do like Nick Stevens in the top 20 this week. I do like Jacob Park, guys. Jacob Park over there at Iowa State playing Texas tonight. I do like him. I think if you have him, particularly in a 2-quarterback league, you've got to get him in your lineup this week. I think he's capable of 30-plus against that Texas defense. Number 22, Nick Fitzgerald, Mississippi State, playing at Auburn. We had Fitzgerald ranked lower last week. I think that was warranted. I think he does a little bit more this week, but it is still a dangerous play at Auburn. But I think he's going to give you enough points in your 2-quarterback leagues to get him in that lineup. 23-24, guys. Mackenzie Milton, Central Florida. Riley Ferguson, Memphis. There's just, there's something inside of me that I just have this gut feeling. I don't know if there's going to be as many points as people may think. Central Florida's defense is respectable. I don't know if Memphis is going to be able to run the ball as well as Memphis has run the ball all year. That's a real interesting matchup for me. I don't think those guys are top 10, top 12 quarterbacks this week, even though most of the damage is going to be done in the air. But I do think that that's an interesting matchup. And I do think both of those players are ranked in a position to get them in your lineups if you're playing in a full FBS 2-quarterback league. One guy that I banged on a few weeks ago, guys, Kellen Mond, quarterback, Texas A&M, seems to be turning things around. Depending on your scoring system, he's given you 25-plus, even 30-plus games back-to-back. This week's opponent, South Carolina. I don't think that that's a bad opponent for Mond. I think you really need to consider him in your Week 5 lineup this week as well, particularly in a Power 5 league and even in full FBS 2-quarterback leagues. The one quarterback I am a little concerned about this week, even though Stanford's defense hasn't particularly been stout, is Manny Wilkins, Arizona State. I don't necessarily think Manny Wilkins is a bench, but I am concerned about him putting up the numbers that he has in recent weeks. Stanford sooner or later is going to figure out things on defense, guys, and put the clamps down on someone, and I would just hate for it to be this week when you've started Manny Wilkins, but we do have him ranked at 32. Remember, once when you get past the 30 range, we're getting fringe on whether or not these guys should start in at quarterback 1, quarterback 2, and the reason we do a deep dive into these rankings is because there are some deep FBS 20-team leagues out there. I know, I get that. I play in a 50-team league as well. So pickings are slim, and sometimes you've got to go 30, 40 down on the list. One guy that I've crept up the list this week, and I'm going to ask you to kind of keep an eye on him. Guy that we had high hopes at the beginning of the year. Jamar Smith, quarterback, Louisiana Tech, playing at home against South Alabama. I have some information for you guys later on in the show that I want to get to in regards to Jamar Smith. I'm going to kind of save that towards the end after I address the rankings. Daniel Jones at 45. I have to tell you, 2-3 weeks ago, Daniel Jones down at 45 would be a little surprising for me. But right now, Britton Brown and Sean Wilson are doing so well on the ground. I don't know if there's any reason to put Daniel Jones in harm's way. That's the reason why we have him ranked so low. Even against Miami, I mean, Miami's defense is solid, but Duke's doing so much damage with their running backs right now. There's no need to get Jones heavily involved in the running game unless they absolutely need him. So I think Daniel Jones is just down there at 45, safe play, a deep FBS. If not, I think you leave him on the bench. And a guy that's been flinging the ball around all year, Tyler Rogers at New Mexico State. You know, I'll be surprised if Tyler Rogers doesn't put up points against Arkansas. But I don't know if I'm willing to take that chance. My confidence level isn't high this week on the road at Arkansas. But boy, I tell you, New Mexico State took Arizona State to the wire. If they take Arkansas State down to the wire as well, be interesting to see what happens with that coaching job over there at Arkansas. I got you. Texas, Iowa State real quick. I'll go ahead and catch on that in a couple of minutes. Let me go ahead and get through the quarterback rankings. And let me say, guys, there's a couple of guys questionable, and I should have probably started this at the top of the show, but in regards to injuries at the quarterback spot, it does look like Brent Stockstill, Middle Tennessee, is going to miss another game this week, so I wouldn't count on him playing. And one thing right now, and I don't know if we got any clarity on it later on this afternoon, I didn't see anything this morning, but the quarterback position at Florida Atlantic is still up for grabs. I'm waiting for them to name a starter again this week, so we'll go ahead and address that if we get any news before kickoff. So that kind of runs you guys through the quarterbacks this week. I know the Texas-Iowa State game is coming up, so I'm going to address that real quick. I do think Jacob Park is a solid play this week. I've been saying it for a while that David Montgomery is been a solid running back. I said that after week 1. I'm on his coattails as well. Alan Lazard, the wide receiver with Iowa State. I think if you got Colin Johnson, you've got to get him play in the game. I think for some of you guys that don't get the extended rankings, I'll even throw this out there that Chris Warren was just outside the top 50. So I do think that he is okay as well. And I haven't gotten an injury update on Monty Foreman or if Texas has named the starting quarterback, because I've been really out of it for the last couple of hours. But when you guys get that information, pass it along, and I'll try to pass it on as well. So that takes care of the Iowa State Texas game coming up at the top of the hour. But with that said, I'm going to go into the week 5. And thank you guys for coming in. More of you guys are joining every week. I'm going to try to do this now that a bunch of you all are coming in here. I'm going to try to do this live every week for you guys. That way I can take your questions here on the show at the end of the show, take your questions that you're sending into Twitter, and really try to give you the thought process that I have when I'm answering some of your emails and looking at some of these rankings. So thanks again for joining in. We'll try to do this every week at around the same time to accommodate you guys' schedule. Week 5, running backs, right? Top of the list, Rashad Penny. I sent out an email a couple of weeks ago. Rashad Penny is just going to be money through the rest of the year. I'm offering the house to get Rashad Penny right now. I just think he is a solid 150 yards, 2 to 3 touchdowns every week. How can you not love Saquon Barkley and Bryce Love after what he did against UCLA last week? Of course, everyone's running through UCLA, but Bryce Love looking like the real deal. Royce Freeman, solid top 5 option every week. And there we go, D'Angelo Brewer, running back, Tulsa playing Navy this week. I think D'Angelo Brewer is going to get a heavy workload against Navy at home this week. And then Philip Lindsay, right? We mentioned running backs against UCLA, sitting there at number 6. Lexington Thomas, UNLV playing San Jose State, who's got one of the worst rush defenses. Big game from that offense at UNLV. Ito Smith creeping back up in the top of the rankings every week again. Home game against North Texas, so he's rebounding after a couple of subpar games at the beginning of the year. Miles Gaskin, number 9 at Oregon State, and I have to tell you, based on injuries from what I'm seeing, it looks like Levon Coleman will not play again. Don't be hesitant. I wouldn't look. I'd bump up Miles Gaskin another couple of spots, guys. Now that I know Levon Coleman is going to be out, I think he's a safe top 10 play this week. And I think you've got to put Darrell Williams there, LSU, filling in for Darius Geis. Look, they're obviously going to try to run the ball down Troy's throat. They're going to try to outmuscle him, especially on the front. I think if you got Darrell Williams, there were some guys want to know long-term, where does Williams fit into the grand scheme of things? I don't know if he's a particularly long-term play unless you play in a Power 5 league. But for this week, if you need a win, and we're headed into week 5 of the season, guys, so we're coming up to the halfway point for some of you all. It's hard to let go Darrell Williams right now when he could be the running back that pushes you to a 25, 30-point game this weekend at home against Troy. I think you've got to get him in the lineup. Then we can look at Taylor, Jeffrey Wilson. There it is. David Montgomery sitting there at 13. Justice Hill, another big week playing Texas Tech this weekend. Ronald Jones with the asterisk by his name. I think he's going to be good to go for Friday night. And then Devin Singletary, Florida Atlantic at number 18. Snell, 19. Mark Walton at number 20. Mark Walton not as high as I thought he would be, but he is playing on the road at Duke. And he is splitting a lot of carries with Homer. I know he was banged up a little bit. That one scares me a little bit of a play, so that's why Mark Walton is down there at 20. Cameron Petway, 22. I mean, boy, did he burn a lot of people last week, guys. Sorry about that. No one saw it coming. From what I've read, from what I've seen, from what I've heard, Cameron Petway was going to play, but with Kerryon Johnson returning and Auburn getting off to a fast start, realized they didn't need him, decided to give him a night off. I expect Cameron Petway and Kerryon Johnson to have big input this week playing at home against Mississippi State. Kervonte Benson with another big performance. He's ranked there at 23, getting a home game against North Carolina. 25, Warren Ball. That's a nice play at Bowling Green, a terrible rush defense. James Williams, Washington State. A lot of questions coming in for James Williams this week, along with Luke Falk. I think you've got to get James Williams in your lineup this week, particularly if you play in a PPR, half PPR league. James Williams has caught at least 10 passes for three out of the 4 weeks this year. I think he gets used heavily in the game against USC. Washington State, we all know they're going to be throwing the heck out of the ball. Hope for a track meet. I think a big game from James Williams there if you got him as a running back 2 or a flex option. You know, I mentioned a few weeks ago, guys, there was one guy that there was 2 guys I wasn't heavy on at the beginning of the year that seemed to be a lot of folks, a lot of you guys were high on. And that was the quarterback at Auburn, Jarrett Stidham. I wasn't high on him in the preseason, and he hasn't really performed well. And LJ Scott, running back of Michigan State, I never really was on his bandwagon. But I have to tell you, a lot of emails over the last few weeks in regards to Travion Williams. I have to tell you, Travion Williams for me over the last 2 years has been that one guy where everybody loves him and he has this monster game. And for 2 or 3 straight weeks, I get an email saying, why isn't Travion Williams ranked that high? And then all of a sudden, Travion Williams creeps up in our rankings, and then he lays an egg, and then all of a sudden we knock him back down for 2 or 3 weeks, and then he takes off again and has a 40-point game. That's Travion Williams right now. I don't know. It's a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde sometimes with Travion Williams, but I think you've got to get him in your lineup as a running back 2 or a flex. Get him in your lineup if you're in a Power 5 league, but he always scares me with the inconsistencies that he has at running back. A combination I like this week, guys, is South Florida running backs, Dearness Johnson and Darius Tice. I love their opponent this week. They're playing at East Carolina. I like Flowers. I like Tice. I like Johnson. I like the whole running game for South Florida this week at East Carolina. Number 39, Andy Davidson, fullback, running back, whoever you want to call him, Army versus UTEP. And Kimon Freeman, the running back for SMU versus Connecticut. We can talk forever and a day about Cortland Sutton, but they seem to have it going on right now with the running game at SMU. Don't be afraid to get him in your lineup this week playing at home against Connecticut. I'm going to throw a few more plays out at you guys and address a few players that 2 or 3 weeks ago we wouldn't have even mentioned, right? Let's talk about Alex Gardner, the running back, Florida International, playing home against Charlotte. I would venture to say that Alex Gardner is unowned in a lot of leagues, but if you're in a deep FBS, you're hurting for buys because there are a ton of buys this week. Alex Gardner is a guy that you got to kind of pluck off the wire and plug him into your lineup this week. I think he's good for at least 100 yards and a touchdown playing at home against Charlotte. And I think Quadri Allison, the running back for Pitt this week at home against Rice. I know there's a lot of folks concerned with Moss or who's getting carries there. I do think, here's one thing. I'm not a betting guy, but I have friends that played against. I actually, and I'll go on record by saying this, I actually like Pitt this week against the spread. I mean, Pitt's lost to some decent teams, guys. Oklahoma State, Penn State, Georgia Tech. Yeah, it's 28-21 to Youngstown State. They barely beat them, but Youngstown State has run through their competition by a score of like 89-9. So I think Pitt's a little undervalued right now. I like for them to cover the spread this week, and I think Allison is a sneaky play at running back for Pitt home against Rice. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to the exclusive email, the one thing that I do is I send out these extended rankings. I'm assuming most of you guys on this show probably subscribe to the extended rankings. I try to throw out one guy a week that, in my opinion, if you have the roster spot, go ahead and pick him up for the, just in case he has a big game. You've got him before he hits the waiver wire, and all of a sudden you might have a spot player, somebody that builds your roster depth. A couple of weeks ago, I threw out Najee Harris. And Najee Harris, it didn't work out. But at the time, we didn't know what was going on with Alabama running back. And right now, Damian Harris, I think, is the guy to have in the Alabama backfield. Last week, on the extended rankings, I threw out Trey Woods, Wyoming. I actually started Trey Woods, Wyoming myself. He's a converted linebacker. They needed a power game. If you know the history of that offense, they need a power back in there on offense. Trey Woods now is the starter for Wyoming, and I think that is going to be a long-term play. For those of you that scooped up on Trey Woods, I think you've got a gem, because right now they have to lean on him with Josh Allen struggling right now. I do have a couple of more names that I threw out for you guys on there. I sent it out last night, early this morning, for you all that have the extended rankings. You should have that. Clemson running back position. Let me address that real quick, right? We've got Feaster, we've got Etienne. In my opinion, I think in everybody's opinion, those are the top two guys right now. People asking me more long-term, who's the better play or who's the better play this week. I have to tell you, I love Etienne. I think Etienne's the better back. He's a home run guy. But what concerns me about Etienne over Feaster is that Feaster got 20 carries last week. Etienne's one of those home run guys or myths, right? If he's not getting 10 carries and doesn't break one to the house, you've got to be careful with that. It could be low point output. But I think moving forward, it's going to be Etienne and Feaster for a little while for that offense. And boy, Clemson's offense is looking better and better every week. I really love that running game right now. If there's two teams right now that are surprising me more running the ball than they are throwing, it's Notre Dame and it's Clemson right now. Malik Davis, running back Florida, we have him at 56. I don't expect his ceiling to be too high. He is playing a respectable Vanderbilt defense. I do think 100 yards and a touchdown is possible if you want to throw him in there. And I do think Brad Anderson, he is the running back over at Middle Tennessee that had a big game last week. Middle Tennessee's been looking for a running back. Brent Stockstill's out. Richie James, once again, questionable. It looks like Anderson may stick if he has another big game. If you guys picked him off the waiver wire, I think you've got a nice steal there. Hopefully he has another game here. If he has two games back-to-back, you could be looking at Middle Tennessee State's starting running back for the rest of the year in conference play. And one guy that I like better than his number 59 ranking is we've got Cam Akers at number 59 this week. My gut tells me that that Cam Akers is going to get a heavy dose this week. I think we're going to get a lot of Cam Akers. I don't see Florida State starting off 3-0. I think they lean heavily on that run game. I'm looking for Cam Akers to outperform his number 59 ranking and have a good week this week on the road at Wake Forest. So, with that being said, guys, that takes care of the running backs. I'm going to address a couple of injury issues right now at the running back spot. It looks like James Gilbert, running back for Ball State, is doubtful. It looks like Darius Geis is not going to play for LSU, like I said when I was addressing the running backs. And Trey Bryant, running back Nebraska, doubtful again. Ronald Jones, USC, looks like he's probable. And as I mentioned, Levon Coleman looks doubtful for Washington. And that's good news if you have Myles Gaskin in your lineup this week. So I'm going to continue with the wide receiver injury report. What we know is that Auden Tate looks like he may be out for a week or so. Or maybe even longer, but he could be back sooner than later. So I'm still optimistic on him. Jalen Smith looks like he's going to be out again for Louisville. Could make Seth Dawkins a nice dark horse play. He's at the end of the wide receiver rankings. I'll address a tight end in the wide receiver rankings. Andy Brenneman, tight end, Massachusetts. Looks like he'll be back this week. A.J. Brown, looks like we got news that he practiced and looks like he'll try to play this week against Alabama. But it looks to me that that's a scary play because you've got a guy that may not be 100%. You've got a guy that may not be 100% going against an Alabama defense. Be careful with A.J. Brown this week. Deontay Burnett looks like he's going to play tomorrow night at Washington. If I had to put money on it, I would say that you're okay with Deontay Burnett this week. So with that being said, guys, we're in now for about 24, 25 minutes. I'm going to get through these receivers. If you missed this and just tuning in here, I'm going to go ahead and address the start bench. I'm going to go ahead and address some of you questions here on the channel and try to check Twitter as well and check some of the start benches that you have going on for week 5. So with that being said, we're going to run into the receiver position, and James Washington obviously at the top. No surprise, the top 2 receivers are coming from that Oklahoma State Texas Tech game, and Deontay Burnett with a star by his name. I hate to see that because there's so much potential in that Washington State game for Deontay Burnett. I think he's going to be healthy. I think at this particular point, you're hoping that you can get 4 quarters out of him, and there's nothing not to like about Darren Andrews, Stephen Ishmael, solid all season long, and there he is, Michael Gallup, resurfacing in our top 10 with a road game at Hawaii. I'm looking for a huge game from Michael Gallup this week. I think Dante Pettis, Washington at Oregon State, is a top 10 play this week. Will Washington run through Oregon State? Probably so. But remember what Washington State did to Oregon State a couple of weeks ago, guys. Oregon State lost a couple of guys on the back end. Washington State just gouged them in the air. I think Jake Browning and the Washington offense is going to do the same thing this week, and I do see Dante Pettis having a big week. You know, the one thing that I will address real quick, Cortland Sutton, wide receiver, SMU. He's given you 40-something points in 1 week, and I don't even think he's given you 10 points in the other 3 weeks. And yet here we are ranking him at number 9 this week. And I have to tell you, I put a lot of confidence level into some of these rankings. And I'm not throwing Cortland Sutton up there at number 9 just for the heck of it because he's Cortland Sutton. I think Cortland Sutton's going to be okay this week. I think you've got to get him in your lineup this week against a Connecticut defense that just absolutely got shellacked against East Carolina last Sunday. I think Cortland Sutton rebounds and has another good game for you. And then I think Cam Phillips there at 10. You always have to be careful now playing someone against Clemson, but Virginia Tech relies on Cam Phillips, and I think he's a safe play being there in the top 10. One name you're going to see, guys, and I'm going to address this offense at the end of the show or a little bit later after the rankings, is Louisiana Tech. I've got Teddy Veal in there at 15. I think he's got 19 receptions in the last 2 weeks. I think he's got incredible value, especially in PPR leagues. I think you've got to get him in your lineup this week. There's Alan Lazard, wide receiver for Iowa State, playing Texas. He's there at number 16. I think you've got to get him in your lineup. And we even have Hakeem Butler at number 48. I know that game's about to kick off, so I wanted to get those 2 names out to you guys as well. I think Colin Johnson, number 20, solid play. So I think Lazard and Johnson are both solid plays. Traquan Smith, Central Florida versus Memphis. I really like him this week, but I don't necessarily think he's a top 10, top 15 receiver this week. He just doesn't get the volume for me, guys, to put him up that high. It'll be real interesting to see. Central Florida is actually playing some decent defense this year, and I don't know if there's going to be as many points scored in that game as some people may believe. Christian Kirk has a good thing going with Kellen Mond. I'm not touching him I'm not taking him. I'm leaving him in my lineup this week for a couple of weeks when A&M was having questionable quarterback play. He was on the borderline of should I or shouldn't I? And I think Marcel Aitman, Oklahoma State, I even think he's a top 15 play with teammate James Washington this week for the Oklahoma State at Texas Tech. Now, guys, I think here's another one. Ty Lee, wide receiver, Middle Tennessee at Florida Atlantic. A lot of folks had incredible value with Ty Lee playing running back for Middle Tennessee State. It looks like with the emergence of Brad Anderson and Jacques Bruce over there at Middle Tennessee, we may see Lee exclusively at receiver again. But it bears watching what will happen if he gets any Wildcat snaps or whatnot, and if Richie James comes back. But I do think Ty Lee is a good play. And when I talk, let me address that real quick. In regards to Richie James, we got a report that A.J. Brown for Ole Miss practice. I have to tell you this, guys. If there is someone that is injured, we don't get their injury reports for college like we do in pros, right? If we haven't gotten any definitive word that a guy practices 48 hours before a kickoff, I'm going to give you some advice. you have to really consider benching him for the week. You cannot take a chance of what happened last week with Darius Geis, because I told everyone, start Darren Williams. Geis played like 5 snaps. He did score a 1-yard touchdown off of a turnover, but that's all you got from him. You have to seriously sit down guys that are questionable heading into Friday. So let's get back into the wide receiver rankings, and I'm going to address another guy, Paris Campbell, in there at number 26. Paris Campbell, for me, becoming one of those home run guys or strikeout guys. You know, he's not going to do what Samuel did. He's not going to give you the rushing yards. He's going to be a big play or bust. I think he's had a 70-something yard touchdown and a 60-something yard touchdown this year so far, but 2 other weeks have been duds. I do think Ohio State has success in the air this week playing at Rutgers, and I do think Campbell is worth getting in there in your lineup. I do have Mims in the top 30. Baylor, I saw something come up for Mims on the bottom of the chat line right there. I think Mims has to be their go-to guy right now. Now that Platt is out playing on a road game at Kansas State, I have to warn you, I don't expect the points from the Baylor offense this week as we've seen in prior weeks. I do expect Baylor to be okay. They're not going to get shut down, but I don't think you'll see the points that we've seen over in recent weeks. A receiver I liked in the preseason, number 31, Keyshawn Johnson, Fresno State. I actually have Keyshawn Johnson at 31, Damari Scott at number 68. I do like the Fresno State offense this week playing at home against a Nevada team that seems to be falling apart at the seams, guys. Scott Miller, Bowling Green wide receiver, playing home against Akron. He's a top 40 play. I've got Isaiah Johnson-Mack in there. I've got so look, guys, that puts 2 Washington State receivers for us in the top 40. And Trevon Brown, East Carolina wide receiver, playing at home against South Florida. He's getting a lot of targets, guys. I think you've really got to consider him as a wide receiver 3 or a flex spot. And I think Devontae Boyd is a sneaky play, UNLV, at home against San Jose State. Devontae Boyd not getting a ton of touches, but he is a big play waiting to happen. And I'll tell you what, here's one guy. I'll throw this last receiver in there before I kind of move on to the start bench. Rashid Bonnet, wide receiver, Louisiana Tech, playing at home against South Alabama, and I'm about to touch upon the Louisiana Tech offense in a minute, guys. So, with that being said, that kind of runs us through the top 60, 70 wide receivers or so. It brings us through the quarterbacks, brings us through the running backs, brings us through the receivers. The one thing that I mentioned about the Louisiana Tech offense is at the beginning of the year it struggled. Right, we were projecting Jared Kraft to have a good year, Jamar Smith to have a huge year. We were hoping that the system would just produce. Well, Alfred Smith got hurt early in the year, and they moved Teddy Veal back. Moved him to the outside. Obviously, as you can tell, the results weren't great. They moved Teddy Veal back to the inside receiver position. Rashid Bonnet is on the outside now. He seems more like a big play receiver, as a matter of fact. And some of you that don't, it's hard to judge some of these college fantasy football performances because some of you all don't know, and what you all may not know is that Rashid Bonnet, not only did he score against Western Kentucky, but he had a chance to actually make his numbers and Jamar Smith's numbers go up. He dropped like a 35-yard touchdown pass that went right through his hands. He would have walked into the end zone. I think the Louisiana Tech offense moving forward is going to start to gel. I really like Teddy Veal. I'm not so high on Jared Kraft. I think South Alabama's got a pretty decent defense, but I'm looking for that Louisiana Tech offense to steadily improve as we get through the midseason and later on in the year. Keep your eye on that. But if you have Teddy, I haven't dropped Teddy Veal since I drafted him, and I can tell you this week, he's going to be in my lineup. So, with that, guys, before I take your questions, I'm going to go ahead with the start bench. And I did try to shorten it this week so I can go ahead and get your questions in a timely manner. But I'm going to go and start with the bench like I usually do. And the first guy that I'm going to throw out there, Larry Rose, running back, New Mexico State, playing at Arkansas, guys. And I know it's difficult to sit Rose after what he did last week and seeing what the Texas A&M offense did to Arkansas's defense last week. However, remember this, Rose has frustrated you. He frustrated you through the first 3 weeks of the season. He didn't give you 100 yards or score a touchdown. And I'm telling you, this week's matchup, he may look more more similar to that type of performance than what he gave us last week. You've got to play the matchup. I really loved Larry Rose last week. He was my one player that I singled out in my start bench. In my start list last week. I'm starting him on the bench this week, Week 5's matchup on the road at Arkansas. Another running back. Matter of fact, guys, all 4 bench guys are running backs this week. The next one on the list, Jordan Chun, running back Troy, playing at LSU, and it's easy to make an argument that LSU's defense would be statistically better if their offense was a lot more efficient. But for as bad as the offense has looked, and for as much as the defense has been on the field, the Tigers are only allowing 106 rushing yards per game on the ground. They've held 3 of their opponents to less than 80 yards rushing. And even if Chun contributes in the passing game, his ceiling is still incredibly low enough for me that I think it's a risk starting him in Week 5. Jordan Chun, a bench, Week 5, Troy at LSU. Running back Tyler Johnson, Maryland, playing at Minnesota. And I have to tell you, I've been high on Ty Johnson all year, but I'm not high on him this week after seeing last week's performance. And look, we can sit here. He had 256 rushing yards through the first 2 weeks of the season. Now, in last week's loss to Central Florida, he only had 25 yards on 11 carries. And I know what you're going to say. Maryland lost 2 starting quarterbacks, and I get that. That does play into it. But you also have to figure that Maryland is playing a road game this week against statistically the #1 rush defense so far in the FBS. That's Minnesota, guys. Surprisingly, they're only allowing 59 yards per game on the ground. I think Ty Johnson is a Week 5 bench on the road at Minnesota. And here's another guy, Ralph Webb. And if you had the exclusive email, I sent and had really big concerns about Ralph Webb after Week 1 because of his yards per carry average. In the opening game, he had 103 yards receiving and a touchdown. But I told you that his rushing average, based on the opponent they were playing, I think it was Middle Tennessee, he had like 46 yards on 24 carries. And I said that we need to monitor his yards per carry and see if that factors in as we go. Here's what I have on Webb this week. He's averaged 4.2 yards per carry in 2015. Which was the lowest yards per carry average in his 3 seasons at Vanderbilt, right? 4.2 in the 3 years as a starter at Vanderbilt. This year, he's carried the ball 65 times. He's only averaging 2.6 yards per carry. And as a team, Vanderbilt's only averaging 3.0 yards per rush. So the problem may not be Webb. The problem may be the offensive line. So don't expect those numbers to change much with this weekend's matchup at Florida. I suggest leaving Webb on your bench Week 5 road game, Vanderbilt at Florida. And here we go, guys. We're going to get to the start list here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 5 guys. I'll save my home run hitter for last. But I'm going to start off with James Williams, who I touched on in the rankings, running back rankings. Williams has yet to top 50 yards rushing, but he has caught at least 10 passes in 3 of Washington State's first 4 games. Expect him to have a significant role in the run game and the pass game Friday night against USC in a nationally televised game, and I think that makes him a very solid fantasy option if you play in a PPR league. Start James Williams Week 5 at home tomorrow night against USC. Andy Davidson, running back / fullback, Army versus UTEP. A lot of success last week. Recommended starting Larry Rose of New Mexico State against UTEP. Well, last week at Tulane, Davidson filled in for an injured Darnell Woolfolk and rushed for 130 yards, carried the ball 26 times. Woolfolk's expected to miss this week's game too, so don't hesitate to put Davidson in against a UTEP defense that's given up almost 250 yards per game on the ground and has allowed 15 rushing touchdowns, which is the 3rd most in the FBS. Andy Davidson, running back Army, get him in your Week 5 lineup at home against UTEP. Damian Harris, running back Alabama, playing home against Ole Miss, and I know what a lot of you guys are thinking out there. It's about time we get an Alabama running back that up in your rankings, Joe, or in the start in the start piece. And you know what? In Power 5 leagues, and I have to say this, in Power 5 leagues, Harris has probably been a constant in your lineup as a running back 2 or flex option because he's kind of giving you that 50, 60 yards and a touchdown every week. But his touches have been limited. if he's going to find the end zone every week now and show us that consistency, you need to try to fit him in as a flex spot against Ole Miss. I think he's going to get enough touches. Ole Miss has given up 184 yards per game on the ground, 4.6 yards per carry. I think Damian Harris gets enough touches this week to warrant a start as a flex spot if you got a deep full FBS league. Now here's two plays that I really like. I'm really excited about this week. Warren Ball, running back Akron, playing on the road against Bowling Green. Akron has played 4 games this year, guys. 2 of them they've played in. They've been competitive. I think they lost to Iowa State by a decent number, and they've lost Penn State by a lot. But in the 2 games that they were competitive, Ball had at least 20 carries. He had at least 100 yards in each one of those games, and he scored a touchdown in each one of those games. This week, they'll play another competitive game. They face a Bowling Green defense that's given up over 243 yards per game on the ground. Look for Akron to lean on Warren Ball, running back, playing on the road in week 5 at Bowling Green. And here we go, the last guy, and I touched on him in the rankings, and I tried not to get too excited, but I'll get excited for him right now. Teddy Veal, wide receiver, Louisiana Tech. I love Teddy Veal this week. You know, his numbers have improved ever since he was moved back to one of the inside receiver positions after Alfred Smith injury. In the past 2 weeks, he's hauled in 19 passes for 188 yards and a touchdown. I expect his positive trend to continue this week against a South Alabama defense that's given up over 285 yards per game in the air. Here it is. I'm back on the Teddy Veal bandwagon as I was in the preseason. Things looking up and up for the Louisiana Tech offense. Teddy Veal, week 5 start at home against South Alabama, guys. So that's it. That's a wrap for the rankings. That's a wrap for the start bench. Kind of touched on injuries. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and try to take some of your questions if you want to send them into the chat. And I'll try to address some of the questions that you have here on Twitter. If I miss it, I apologize. I'll try to do the best that I can. What about Luke Del Rio? Upside, Vanderbilt? Not really looking for too much right there, guys. Scott, I don't really know right there. I'm not really liking too much about the Florida passing game right now. Here's a question, guys. 2-quarterback league coming in from Adam Meyer. Power 5. Already starting Herbert with Oregon. Go with Josh Jackson, Virginia Tech versus Clemson, or Zach Taylor for Baylor at Kansas State. He's leaning Taylor. I have to tell you, I'm leaning Josh Jackson. I'm going home. I know it's a tough matchup against Clemson, but I do think that I am a little concerned about Zach. He must be Zach Smith for Baylor. I'm actually going to go with Josh Jackson on there, but I do think it's a close one. Who has a better game this week? This comes from Daniel Vaught. Who better game this week, Ronald Jones or Stephen Carr against Washington State? I think if Ronald Jones is healthy, he's going to get the workload. I think Ronald Jones is going to be the best bet out of those 2 backs, even though I do expect Stephen Carr to have a big game. Who has the most upside? Ryan Finley, Shane Morris, Clayton Thorson, or Alex Hornibrook? I do think it's Ryan Finley this week. I think you've got to get the North Carolina State quarterback in your lineup if those are your options. I do like Finley out of the group that you just gave me right there. Keep them coming, guys, because I'll stay here as long as you keep sending them in. Another question right here. Due to injury and bye weeks, this comes in from Michael Perry. Mark Chapman for Trevion Brown. Trevon Brown, I don't know. I like Brown, guys. Scott, I'm going to go with Trevon Brown instead of Mark Chapman. I like the ECU receiver right now, and I like the targets. He's even getting some handoffs as well out of the backfield. So due to injury and bye weeks, this comes in from Michael Perry. No problem. Due to injury and bye weeks, I have Andy Isabella in my lineup. Do I drop him to pick up Irvin Phillips this week as I'm already starting Ishmael? Guys, sometimes you can't be concerned about 2 receivers, particularly if you play in a PPR league. If you had Irvin Phillips and Steve Ishmael last week against LSU, you did okay. I don't think there's many people that put them in the lineup, but sometimes, depending on your roster size, it's okay to get 2 guys from the same team in your lineup. I know one league that I play in, we have 14 guys in a starting lineup. We go 4 receivers and 2 flex. So, you know, there's no hesitation right there if you have that type of setup. That's going to address all the questions that I have here on Twitter. If you guys have any more, send them on in. And I'm going to give it another few seconds. and see if you guys coming in. Once again, I thank you guys for coming in. We're going to try to do this every week around the same time so we can get you guys in, get you guys comments, questions, lineups, rosters, get all that addressed. Taquan Marshall, is he legit? Yes. Y-E-S spells yes. Taquan Marshall is legit. He's up there in our rankings again, and I do think he's a quality start this week against North Carolina, and I do think Kervontae Benson is a quality start this week. Scott, again, Isaiah Lottie, I do like his potential. I do like it in Sun Belt Conference play. Right now, I think you've got to stay away from him this week against Arkansas. I think it's too much of a risk right now. I don't know. I'd probably be exploring options if I have Lottie, wide receiver, New Mexico State, playing at Arkansas this week. So look, guys, I'm going to stop it right there. Once again, like I said, thanks for joining. Always a pleasure to come in. I love sharing what kind of goes on through my head, what goes on through the rankings process with you guys. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to try to do this every week at the same time to get the participation that we got this week. And more of you guys are coming on in. So with that being said, guys, thanks for coming in. That's going to do it for week 5. If you have the email and have any additional questions, send them on in to me. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the games. By the time we get in and I talk to you guys next week, we'll be halfway through the fantasy regular season. So good luck, guys. Once again, this is Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the College Fantasy Football site, and I'll talk to you guys next week.